On this special School Matters edition of Inside Education, we break down two important issues with some of our Clark County School District trustees. First, what defines acceptable communication between students, employees, coaches, and volunteers, and how to best regulate. Then we dive into the superintendent search. What is the process to hire the next leader of the nation's fifth largest school district? And when will a new superintendent be chosen? We have several trustees in studio to answer these questions and more. School Matters starts right now. Thanks so much for joining us for this special School Matters edition of Inside Education. I'm your host, Mitch Truswell. What is appropriate interaction between staff and students, volunteers and students, as well as coaches and students? We're not just talking about interactions at school, but also online. Clark County School District officials recently announced a new video training for Policy and Regulation 4100. That's the policy and regulation that outlines proper relationship parameters with the goal of creating caring, trusting relationships. There are videos targeted for various audiences. Well, there's a lot to talk about with this issue, and joining me to explain the new video trainings and also break down the policy and regulation is President of the Board of Trustees, Deanna Wright, who also represents District A. Vice President Trustee Carolyn Edwards from District F. Trustee Dr. Linda Young, representing District C. And Kirsten Searer, Clark County School District's Chief of Communication, Marketing, and Strategy. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here today. We appreciate it. Let's start with Policy and Regulation 4100. Trustee Edwards, this is seeming to define the appropriate communication, the appropriate interactions. What do parents need to know about these rules and regulations? What's the most important thing you want them to remember about this?
So this policy applies to all of our staff, our volunteers, our coaches, and it is that there are times when communication with a student digitally or electronically has to happen within certain time frames, should not be happening late at night or in the wee hours of the morning, and should never be a communication that's between one employee and one student. It should be a communication that is to a team or to a group of students you're working with, and there should be no communication between individuals. And any communication should be completely loggable. And
by that you mean?
And I mean that there's a record of the communication, there's a tracking system for that communication, and if you delete that communication, there's still a loggable way to find that communication, so that if a problem arises, we can go back and see what was going on and deal with it appropriately.
Do you feel like this is kind of the comprehensive approach that has been needed?
You know, we have 40,000 employees in our school district, and we have a few employees who are behaving badly. And we want to ensure that all of our employees know what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. These are professionals, and they should be working with students. There's a boundary between who you are as a teacher or a coach and who you are as a student. And we want to ensure that that boundary is understood by both our employees and our students, so they know what's the appropriate things and what are not.
Okay. Kirsten, can we talk about the approved communication methods, because that's part of the regulation and the rules. So there's something like Google Classroom, and you said something remind.com. So what makes them the preferred method?
Well, we're open to other methods as well, but as Trustee Edwards mentioned, these are methods that are loggable, meaning that there's always a record kept of the conversation. And this is for the protection of our employees as well as our students. Right. We want to make sure that everything's above the board and that people understand what is an appropriate relationship to have with students. We know that it's important that our students trust our teachers and our coaches. We know that it's important that they feel that the teachers and coaches care about them. We want them to feel that. But we also want to make sure there's really clear boundaries that are set.
So at this point, something like Facebook is not an approved communication, because that could allow for the one-to-one contact, not a group.
Well, so that's a really good point. We've also told our employees that they need to maintain private emails and social media that have privacy settings set to make sure that students aren't looking at them. And then they need to have public accounts. Facebook, I'm not actually sure if that one's loggable. We'll have to look at that. But if someone is using any sort of social media platform or any kind of application with students, they need to make sure that they're using their public email, their CCSD email, and that that there is some sort of record kept of that conversation.
Right. I think we all understand that there are reasons, obviously, and instances why we have this regulation. But I also have to ask, you know, it also you also want to preserve that kind of the appropriate relationship between a teacher and a student. Trustee Young, there are indications where, you know, that teacher may be the only outlet for that student to really talk about perhaps something that is bothering them. So you have to maintain that.
Well, you do.
Appropriately.
Appropriately, but you always have to remember you are the professional and you are the adult. And it's critical that you don't in any way jeopardize a student's sensitivity who's coming to you with some important information that they haven't shared with anyone else. And you may be the only lifeline that child has. But you have to also know that when it is time that you reach out to the child and make sure the child feels safe, that you also look toward professional support for a child and also recommend others to be involved when it is necessary to do that. Give you a small example. At one of my schools, a teacher came to me and said there was a mark on a child's arm that looked inappropriate. And they didn't want to certainly violate the student's comfort level, but they needed to report that. And we have to remember our first concern is for the safety and the well-being of the child at all times.
Right. So much of communication, well, certainly with students, but even teachers, is with text messaging. And that's another part of this. That is supposed to be a group text, correct? That's the safety part of it, is that there's no one-to-one.
Yeah, the new policy and regulation 4100 prohibits individual texting between employees, adults, CCSD adults, and students.
Right.
And we've seen that that's where some of these relationships have kind of started creating, there's been a creation of a relationship over text. So we do allow employees and coaches to engage in group texts with students, or they could put another employee on the text chain. Or our preference really would be that they use something like this remind.com app, which is basically a text service.
Okay. Let's talk about something else that is part of this as a result of state law. Volunteers, that includes coaches or people that have regular or unsupervised access to students, they're now also part of this, which they were not in the past. How will that change things?
Well, I want to make it clear, we've always fingerprinted our coaches, even if they're volunteers. So that always has been a requirement.
Okay.
This new state law, Senate Bill 225, passed in 2017, says that any volunteer, be it a parent, a coach, anybody, who's in the schools at least 4 times a month, or has unsupervised contact with students, now has to be fingerprinted. So that's part of a state law. And then the state law also says that all volunteers have to sign a form that acknowledges that they are mandatory reporters, just as our employees have always been.
Okay, all right. So what do you think about do you think this is going to have a real change in some of the employees that have behaved badly in the past, this regulation?
I don't know that we can speak for the very small group that has not behaved appropriately, but I think that this is better awareness for the adults around them, for the parents out there, and for the students. You know, this really gives them a better idea of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. And so I think that it is a really good discussion for us to have as a community, and starts to set up those boundaries and lets everybody know kind of where they fit in this puzzle.
For the mom who volunteers on a regular basis, do you think some of those people may be discouraged now.
That's
They have to go fingerprint. Obviously, you know, we know the issue behind this. We're trying to protect kids, but
That's a concern because to do the fingerprinting requires a trip down to the Greer building to get fingerprinted, then a trip down to get your badge. So that's 2 trips, and there's a cost to do the fingerprinting. It's good for 4 years, I believe, but still there's a cost. Now, at some of my schools, there are people who aren't doing it, and so they're not volunteering anymore. We're concerned that we're discouraging parental involvement when we should be encouraging it. At the same time, let me just tell you, I have one of my schools that has 100 volunteers fingerprinted within the first 3 months of the school year. So they figured it out, and they went together in groups and did it, and then went back to get their badges, and so it's doable, but it is some time and some effort and some money.
and along with the fingerprinting, we should point out there is a background check that's part of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, anytime we run a fingerprint on an employee, a coach, or a volunteer, we do a full FBI background check. That's why it does cost $60.
Okay.
And so that looks for not even any, it does look for convictions for anything. And we're looking for major felonies, any kind of sex crime, any kind of crime involving a child. But it also looks at charges and arrests. So we can even tell if someone's even been arrested for any kind of crime like that.
Okay. Obviously, it tells you what happened in the past, but as I've heard before, there's no way to determine what's going to happen in the future with any of your employees.
Right.
Unfortunately, right? But they're required to report anything, an arrest, aren't they,
Yes?
to the district?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, our employees are required to report anything. And we are currently, all of our employees and all of our students are watching these mandatory videos outlining policy and regulation 4100. All of them will be fully trained by spring break, which is the end of March.
Okay, and since you brought that up, we want to encourage all of you to check out the videos intended to help explain the policies for all groups involved. We want to give you a website to go to. It is ccsd.net/protectourkids. We encourage you to take a look at those videos. There are videos for parents, for teachers, for students. Really encourage you to take a look. We're going to switch gears now because soon there will be a switch in leadership for the Clark County School District, and we want to talk about that as well. Last month, the Board of Trustees held a series of public meetings asking for the public to provide input on priorities they want trustees to consider when searching for a new superintendent. But first, let's take a quick look at why the search is taking place.
It's one of those things where you put your life's work into a 30-year period and you look back and you're like, where did it all go?
After a 30-year career with the Clark County School District, Superintendent Pat Skorkowski is retiring as of Saturday, June 30th, 2018. He made the announcement fall of last year after holding the district's top spot for 5 years.
I needed to let the board know that they have 10 months in which to find a replacement. And as we've seen in the past here in Clark County, sometimes that's not always easy. So I needed to give them plenty of time to make that choice.
The new superintendent will inherit a district with a graduation rate on the rise and growth in areas like magnet schools and school construction. But the next superintendent will also face a budget deficit and a reorganization effort that is still in its infancy. In an effort to collect input from parents, students, employees, and the business community, trustees held a series of 5 public meetings at various high school theaters and gyms. The meetings were also streamed online in an effort to make the discussion accessible to everyone. And once again, we have our trustee panel here to discuss the search for a new superintendent. Trustee Wright, let's start with you. We know the process has already started. It's underway. Tell us where we are at this moment in time. What happens and what happens next?
Sure. So where we are is we, as a board, hired a search firm. We had a community input meetings and held those around the valley. We also had a community-wide survey to give input. We had the search firm come back and report to us. And we now have gone to the process of putting the information out for people to apply to be superintendent. So the search firm is going on all kinds of different media platforms.
They're
Twitter,
advertising?
Yes, they're advertising in different education publications and different conferences, and it's also on their website, which is Ray and Associates, as well as we have a superintendent search website through CCSD that will connect you to their website for information on the qualifications.
Okay, and I know the search, I believe the search ends next month.
It closes March 15th, so
Okay.
applications have to be completed by March 15th, and then the search firm will begin the vetting process. They will go through the scope of candidates and narrow it down to a number of finalists. We don't know what that number will be because it's in part dependent upon who applies
Right.
and who meets the criteria or best fits with what we're looking for. And then the trustees will conduct interviews on the 12th and 13th and 14th of April, and those will be live webcast as well so that people can watch them. And then shortly thereafter, we'll pick a superintendent and begin the negotiations with that person and hopefully have them start sometime in June.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the meetings and the live webcast that you just mentioned. I didn't notice a great turnout. I watched some of these online for the public input, the opportunity to provide input on, these. Please consider these things when choosing a new superintendent. Trustee Young, were you surprised at the turnout? And let me tell, what did you hear that you want to keep in mind as the board chooses a new superintendent?
Well, several things came to mind as we had the opportunity to have the various meetings. I think, and I'm just looking kind of around the district and even in my particular area, we try to make sure that information got out. My community typically, you almost have to do a reach out, and you have to do a personal reach out. There's a digital divide. They don't not always do emails, not always do interactions on the communication through a website and that kind of thing. So I wasn't too surprised about that. But I also feel they have a lot of confidence in us as trustees.
Right.
We kind of got the word out that we were going to do the process fair. We were going to be very conscientious and make sure that the information that we received, we would report back to them in individual meetings and our own special meetings when we have our own group parent meetings. So I wasn't too surprised about that.
Okay.
I think the most important factor that people want to see is that their voice comes forward and that they have an opportunity through our board meetings. We have our board meetings. We have 3 different ways you can communicate. We have what we call non-agenda items. We have agenda items, which is an agenda item, ongoing agenda item, and then we also have non-agenda items at the end. So I think the most important factor that community at least want to be engaged in is that their voice bubbles up, that they're heard.
That they're heard.
That they're heard. And I think they do feel that way with us. I think they have a lot of confidence in us as trustees.
Okay. Trustee Wright, what did you hear at those meetings that will stay with you as this decision is made?
Things that I think I heard multiple times at different meetings where they want a leader that is a good communicator. I think they feel sometimes that the communication is sort of lost between the superintendent and that level versus down to the school and parent level. Another thing that I heard a lot of was they want somebody who is in the community at schools, at school events, and it is continuing to take us to higher heights for student achievement. Everybody's looking for us to not just continue to the next level, because we have been growing and having great successes and things, but they want us to start to get into that national recognition and take it to the top. So.
Okay. Trustee Edwards, what qualities what did you hear? And then I want to ask you about the qualities that you will be looking for in the next superintendent.
So one of the things that I heard was that they want a superintendent who will focus on students first. And I think what they mean by that is the student achievement piece that you heard Trustee Wright reference. But they also want somebody who will elevate not just school climate, but the climate in the entire district. With the recent reorg, and with our inability to give raises like we would like to be able to do, I think morale is low in the district, and we need to address that. And so that is going to require, because raises are in part a state obligation, is going to require somebody who can communicate well with our legislators and with the legislature to ensure that the needs that we have are met so that we can meet the needs of our employees and our students.
And it's also, you pointed out, the budget for the district is more than $2 billion.
Right, $2.4 billion.
Yeah, that's, not everybody has that skill level, not that the superintendent does it all.
Right.
But that's a lot of 320,000 plus employees.
Students, right.
It's a
Students,
big job.
not employees.
Not employees, job, students, sorry.
Yeah.
And then 40,000 employees.
There we go. That's a big job.
Yes, it's a big job. So ideally, we would like somebody who has some experience working with a large organization. And if they don't, if, for example, we have an internal candidate who applies who hasn't led the district, obviously they're an employee here, then to recognize what their skill set is and what their skill set isn't, and bring people in who can fill the skill set they don't have, who they will actually listen to and be advised by.
Okay. Go ahead.
I was going to say it's vital that they recognize that having a good, strong team around them to advise them. We're not going to have somebody that's Iron Man, Bruce Wayne,
one person
to do everything. And so to recognize where they need assistance and have those people in key positions around them to watch out for the icebergs and tell them there's an iceberg, that is just vital, vital.
Okay. One thing I heard in listening to the online meetings was some concern brought up about bringing in someone from outside the district. Many people said they'd prefer to have someone that was in the district, that is already familiar with the reorganization, which is already familiar with the graduation rate increase, the student achievement increases, and is already on board. How do you feel about that? Trustee Young, do you have a preference? Or?
Well, I really don't. I would like to see someone who is innovative, who a little bit outside the box, who sees the trustees as an asset. Utilize some of our experiences, some of our background, not that we would get into operations, but we do have strong connections to our community, and we have some background information of perhaps we know where the bones are buried, so to speak.
Right.
And so we have historical background to what's happened in the community. I would also like to see a superintendent that's more inclusive, that continues to be inclusive. I think Superintendent Pat Skorkowski has done a good job with that. But to even take it up to another level, we have very talented people in our school district, and sometimes I think they're underutilized. And I would like to see a little bit more involvement with traditional kind of people who could go outside and to another potential in terms of their ability and their skill sets.
Okay. What else should people know about this search?
Well, we will hopefully have somebody in place by June who, if they are external, can have some communications with our current superintendent so they start to have a smooth transition. If it's an internal candidate, then you probably don't need that. I do know that we're hearing from the business community that we need somebody who understands the fiscal side of the district. And that's why I said what I said about if it's somebody internal, they're going to have to be very strong about listening to a fiscal person who oversees that side of the district, because that's critical for us to continue to improve in that area. And so an external person without an education experience then has the same challenge.
Right.
They would have to hire and have somebody who is on the education side who they listen to, because It's almost like you need two superintendents.
Yeah, one that has the business, one that has
One
the
has the
educational.
education, right?
Right. But we've had Superintendent Pat Skorkowski for 5 years, and that beats kind of the average. It's a couple of years.
Average
2 to
is
3 years.
average for large school districts is about 2.5 years. So to have Pat Skorkowski for 5 years is great. And traditionally, we've kept superintendents longer than the 2.5 years. So, so we would want somebody who was going to be here for more than 2.5 years.
That's
we think we need some tenure.
Absolutely.
But I'd like to add one thing.
Quickly?
Very quickly. I do think we need to quickly acknowledge the fact that we are a public entity and that we include all students. And I would want someone who supports public education but keeps the whole choice issue open and uplift the public schools and the public arena for students from all cultures and from all backgrounds.
Absolutely. Thank you all for your time. We appreciate it. A big thank you to all of our trustees for joining us for this special School Matters edition of Inside Education. Again, President of the Board of Trustees, Deanna Wright, who also represents District A, Vice President, Trustee Carolyn Edwards from District F, Trustee Dr. Linda Young representing District C, and also our thanks to Kirsten Searer with the school district as well. Thanks for their time today. Before we leave you, a quick reminder that you can watch this episode and past episodes on the Vegas PBS website or YouTube page. You can also follow the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag InsideEducation. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you, we hope, in 2 weeks.